One day before the division of assets between me and my husband, my daughter-in-law said, "You'll be left with nothing, and we'll send you to a nursing home." When I got there, everyone was making jokes about me, until my lawyer smiled, opened the envelope with a tape. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. You're going to end up with nothing, and we're sending you to a nursing home." Lyra's voice cut through the lawyer's office like a blade, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany table as she delivered those words with such casual cruelty. I sat there, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling every one of my 59 years weighing down on me like stones. The room fell silent except for the tick of an antique clock on the wall. My son Darren shifted uncomfortably in his seat beside his wife, but he didn't say a word. Not one word to defend me. The mother who had raised him alone, who had worked 2 jobs to put him through college, who had sacrificed everything so he could have the life he wanted. "Now, Mrs. Patterson," Mr. Richardson, the lawyer, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Let's keep this civil. We're here to discuss the division of assets following your husband's passing." Lyra laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Civil? She's been living in our house for free for 2 years. It's time she learned what the real world looks like. Our house." She called it our house, when Richard and I had bought it 35 years ago, long before Darren even dreamed of marrying this woman. But somehow, in the 2 years since my husband's death, Lyra had managed to make me feel like a guest in my own home. "Mom," Darren finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. He wouldn't even look at me. "Maybe it would be better if you had. Professional care. You know, people your age. People my age." As if 59 meant I had 1 foot in the grave. As if the woman who had potty-trained him, who had stayed up nights when he had pneumonia, who had cheered at every baseball game, was now too old and useless to matter. I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had his eyes become so cold? When had his spine become so bent under his wife's influence? This wasn't the boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who would beg me to make my special pancakes on Sunday mornings. "The house needs to be sold," Lyra continued, pulling out a folder thick with papers. "Darren and I have found a lovely little facility about an hour away. Very affordable. They even have bingo nights." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like being shipped off to rot among strangers was some kind of generous gift. The other people in the room, Darren's Uncle Tom, Richard's sister Margaret, they all sat there watching this spectacle unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed almost amused by my predicament. Margaret actually chuckled. "Well, Glenda, you always said you wanted to try new things. New things, like being abandoned by the family I had devoted my life to building." Mr. Richardson shuffled through his papers, his expression neutral but professional. "Mrs. Patterson, you do understand that without a clear will from your late husband regarding the house, and given that your son is listed as co-owner on several accounts—" "She understands," Lyra interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "Don't you, Glenda? You understand that this is what's best for everyone." I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell them all exactly what I thought of this betrayal. But instead, I just sat there, feeling smaller and smaller with each passing moment. The woman who had once been strong enough to work double shifts at the diner while putting herself through night school, who had been brave enough to raise a child alone after Richard's first heart attack, that woman seemed to have disappeared somewhere along the way. "The nursing home has an opening next week," Darren said, still avoiding my eyes. "We've already put down the deposit. Already put down the deposit. They had planned this, discussed it, arranged my entire future without even pretending to include me in the conversation. I was being disposed of like an old piece of furniture they no longer wanted." Tom shifted in his chair, finally speaking up. "Now, hold on. This seems a bit rushed. Maybe Glenda should have some time to consider her options." "What options?" Lyra's voice turned sharp. "She has no income beyond Social Security. She can't maintain a house this size. Be realistic, Tom. Realistic. That's what they called it when they wanted to justify treating me like garbage." Mr. Richardson cleared his throat again. "Well, there is one matter I need to address before we proceed. Your late husband left specific instructions about a sealed document in my safe. It's not to be opened unless certain conditions are met." Lyra rolled her eyes. What kind of conditions? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, but I believe those conditions may have been met today. He stood up, moving toward a large safe in the corner of his office. Richard was very specific about when this envelope should be opened. My heart began to pound. Richard had always been a careful man, thoughtful about details that others overlooked. Even in death, maybe he had found a way to protect me from this nightmare. This is ridiculous, Lyra muttered. But I noticed her confidence wavering just slightly as Mr. Richardson pulled out a manila envelope sealed with red wax. The envelope had my name written on it in Richard's familiar handwriting, along with a date from 3 months before his death. He had known. Somehow, he had seen this coming. Mr. Richardson broke the seal carefully and pulled out what appeared to be a DVD and several official-looking documents. Mrs. Patterson, your husband left specific instructions that you should view this immediately if you were ever threatened with removal from your home or mistreated by family members. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Lyra's face had gone pale, and Darren was finally looking at me, confusion written across his features. As Mr. Richardson moved to set up the small television in his office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a tiny spark of hope beginning to flicker in the darkness that had consumed my life. The screen flickered to life, and there was Richard, sitting in this very office, looking directly into the camera with the serious expression I knew so well. My eyes filled with tears just seeing his face again, but his first words made everyone else in the room go completely silent. If you're watching this, Glenda, it means someone is trying to take advantage of you, and I made sure that would never happen. The video paused as Mr. Richardson adjusted the volume, but Richard's words echoed in my mind. If you're watching this, Glenda, it means someone is trying to take advantage of you. I could feel Lyra's eyes boring into me from across the table, her earlier confidence now replaced with something that looked almost like fear. Darren sat frozen, his mouth slightly open as if he couldn't quite process what was happening. As the video resumed, Richard's voice filled the room with that calm authority I remembered so well. I've been watching, sweetheart. I've seen how things have changed since I got sick. I've seen how our son allows his wife to treat you, and I won't have it. My throat tightened. Even from beyond the grave, Richard was defending me in a way that Darren never had. But before the video could continue, memories came flooding back, pulling me into the painful recollections of how we had reached this point. I remembered the exact moment when everything started to change. It was 18 months ago, just 6 months after Richard's funeral. Lyra had suggested they move in temporarily to help me through my grief. At first, it seemed like a blessing. The house felt so empty without Richard, and having Darren close by was comforting. But within weeks, small changes began. Lyra started rearranging the kitchen, claiming she was helping me organize. She threw out Richard's favorite coffee mug because it was chipped and unsanitary. She replaced our family photos in the living room with her own modern art pieces, saying the old pictures made the space feel dated. I should have spoken up then. I should have set boundaries, but I was drowning in grief, and having my son nearby felt like the only thing keeping me afloat. So I stayed quiet while she slowly erased Richard from our home. The worst part wasn't the redecorating. It was watching my relationship with Darren deteriorate day by day. Lyra had a way of positioning herself between us during every conversation, answering questions I directed to him, making decisions about our life without consulting me. Mom, don't you think you're getting a little forgetful? Darren had asked one evening after Lyra claimed I'd forgotten to turn off the stove. I hadn't forgotten. I'd been interrupted by her phone call while cooking dinner, but when I tried to explain, Lyra just smiled that patronizing smile and patted my shoulder. It's normal at your age, Glenda. Nothing to be embarrassed about. Your age. She was only 15 years younger than me, but she spoke to me like I was ancient and incompetent. The financial pressure started subtly, too. The property taxes are going up, Lyra would mention during dinner. And the heating bill was huge this winter. Maybe we need to think about downsizing. She never said it directly, but the implication was clear. The house was too expensive for me to maintain alone. Never mind that Richard and I had paid off the mortgage years ago, or that I had savings specifically set aside for maintenance and taxes. Somehow, in Lyra's version of reality, I was a financial burden on them. I started giving them money for household expenses, thinking I was being helpful. When the refrigerator needed replacing, I paid for it. When they wanted to renovate the master bathroom, I contributed half the cost. Each time, Lyra would thank me with that same false sweetness, then make another comment about how difficult it must be for me to manage on a fixed income. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest part. My longtime friends stopped visiting because Lyra made them uncomfortable with her pointed comments about not wanting to overstimulate Glenda. My weekly bridge club became a monthly occurrence, then stopped altogether because Darren worried about me driving in traffic. I became a prisoner in my own home, dependent on their approval for everything from grocery shopping to doctor's appointments. When had I become so weak? When had I allowed myself to shrink into this shadow of the woman I used to be? The woman I used to be had survived Richard's first heart attack when Darren was only 12. I had juggled 2 jobs, managed all the household responsibilities, and still found energy to help him with homework and drive him to soccer practice. I had been strong then, resilient. But grief has a way of making you vulnerable, and Lyra had recognized that vulnerability from the beginning. She hadn't moved in to help me. She had moved in to take over. The video continued playing, pulling me back to the present. Richard was explaining something about legal documents, his voice growing more serious. I want you to know, Glenda, that I saw what was happening. I watched how Lyra looked at our house, our belongings, like she was already calculating their worth. I heard the conversations she thought I couldn't hear from my hospital bed. Darren flinched at these words, and I could see him glancing nervously at his wife. Lyra's face had gone completely white. I need to tell you about a conversation I overheard, Richard continued on the video. It was the night before my last surgery. Lyra and Darren were in the hospital corridor, and she was already making plans. My heart started pounding. I remembered that night. I had been sitting by Richard's bedside, holding his hand while he slept fitfully before the risky procedure that ultimately took his life. I had stepped out only briefly to get coffee from the vending machine. She told our son that once I was gone, it would be easy to convince you that you needed care, that the house was too much for you to handle. She had already researched nursing homes, Glenda, before I was even dead. The room was deadly silent now. I could hear the clock ticking, could hear Lyra's shallow breathing, could feel Darren's shock radiating across the table. But what she doesn't know, Richard's voice grew stronger, more determined, is that I made preparations. I protected you, sweetheart, in ways she never saw coming. Mr. Richardson paused the video and looked directly at me. Are you ready to hear the rest, Mrs. Patterson? Because what comes next is going to change everything. I looked around the room at the faces of people who had been ready to ship me off to die among strangers, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a surge of the old strength, the old determination. Play it, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years. I want to hear everything. Richard's face filled the screen again as Mr. Richardson resumed the video. Even through the grainy recording, I could see the determination in his eyes, the same look he used to get when he was solving a particularly difficult problem at work. Glenda, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound complicated, but I need you to listen carefully. 3 months ago, when Dr. Martinez told me the cancer was spreading faster than expected, I knew I had to protect you from what I could already see coming. My chest tightened. Richard had never told me the cancer was spreading faster. He had kept that knowledge to himself, shouldering the burden alone while making plans to protect me. I've restructured our assets in a way that Lyra doesn't understand, and frankly, in a way that our son doesn't understand either. The house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, none of it is what it appears to be on the surface. Lyra made a small choking sound. Darren was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had turned white. You see, Richard continued, his voice taking on the patient tone he used when explaining complex concepts. I established what's called a revocable living trust 18 months ago. The house isn't just in both our names anymore, Glenda. It's held by the trust, with you as the primary beneficiary and trustee. Mr. Richardson paused the video and pulled out one of the documents from the envelope. This is the trust agreement, Mrs. Patterson. What your husband is explaining is that while your name appears on various documents as co-owner with your son, the legal reality is quite different. I stared at the papers, trying to process what this meant. Legal documents had always intimidated me, but I could see Lyra's face growing paler with each word the lawyer spoke. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Richardson smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. "It means, Mrs. Patterson, that you have far more control over your assets than anyone in this room realized, including your son and daughter-in-law." He resumed the video, and Richard's voice filled the room again. "The beautiful thing about a trust, sweetheart, is that it includes specific conditions. I've written into the agreement that if you are ever threatened with forced relocation, or if anyone attempts to coerce you into giving up your home, the trust activates additional protections." "What kind of protections?" Darren finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. As if Richard could hear the question from beyond the grave, he continued, "If anyone, and I mean anyone, including our son, tries to force you out of your home or threatens you with institutionalization against your will, they forfeit any claim to inheritance, not just from the house, but from everything." The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "But that's not all," Richard's voice continued, and I could almost hear the satisfaction in his tone. "I've also established what's called a protection clause. If you're ever mistreated by family members who are supposed to care for you, you have the right to revoke their access to any shared assets immediately." Lyra finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "This can't be legal. You can't just cut family out like that." Mr. Richardson looked at her with professional detachment. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, it's completely legal. Your father-in-law was very thorough. He consulted with 3 different attorneys to ensure the trust would hold up under any legal challenge." Richard's image on the screen leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more serious. "Glenda, I need you to understand something. I loved our son, but I watched him change after he married Lyra. I watched him become weak, spineless. I watched him allow his wife to disrespect you in ways that would have horrified the boy I raised." Darren flinched as if he'd been slapped. His eyes darted between the screen and me, confusion and shame warring across his features. "I'm not doing this to be cruel," Richard continued. "I'm doing this because you deserved better than to spend your final years being treated like a burden. You sacrificed everything for our family, and our family owes you dignity and respect, not manipulation and threats." The video showed Richard pausing to take a sip of water, and I could see how frail he had become in those final months. But his voice remained strong as he continued. "Here's what the trust means in practical terms. You own the house outright, not co-ownership, not shared ownership. You own it. The bank accounts that Lyra thinks are joint accounts, they're controlled by the trust, which means controlled by you. The investment portfolio that our son assumes he'll inherit, that's yours too, as long as you're alive and not being mistreated." I felt dizzy. All these months of feeling powerless, of being made to feel like I was dependent on their charity, and I had actually been in control the entire time. "But Richard," I whispered to the screen, "why didn't you tell me?" As if he could anticipate my question, Richard's voice answered, "I didn't tell you about the trust initially because I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. I hoped our son would step up and protect you the way a son should protect his mother. I hoped Lyra would show you the respect you deserved, but I prepared for the possibility that they wouldn't." Mr. Richardson pulled out another document. "This is the key provision, Mrs. Patterson. The trust states that if you are ever threatened with forced institutionalization by family members, or if you are subjected to verbal abuse or manipulation regarding your living situation, you have the right to invoke what your husband called the nuclear option." "Nuclear option?" My voice was barely audible. "Complete severance," Mr. Richardson explained. "You can cut off their access to any inheritance, remove them from your will entirely, and take back any money or property you may have given them over the past 2 years." The implications hit me like a tidal wave. The money I had given them for house repairs, for the new refrigerator, for countless other expenses, I could demand it back. The renovations Lyra had insisted on, claiming they were improvements to our house, she had been spending my money to improve my property. Lyra seemed to realize this too. Her face had gone from pale to green, and she was gripping the arms of her chair like she might collapse. "There's more," Richard said from the screen, and I could swear I heard a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "Glenda, I want you to know that I documented everything. Every conversation I overheard, every instance of disrespect, every manipulation. It's all recorded in a journal that Mr. Richardson has copies of." Mr. Richardson nodded and pulled out a thick-bound notebook. "Your husband was very thorough, Mrs. Patterson. He documented dates, times, witnesses when possible. Everything from Lyra throwing away your belongings without permission to Darren's failure to defend you when she made cruel comments about your age." I stared at the notebook, overwhelmed. Richard had been protecting me even when I thought I was completely alone. "The choice is yours now, sweetheart," Richard's voice continued from the video. "You can forgive them and continue as before if you believe they've learned their lesson and will treat you with the respect you deserve. Or you can use the power I've given you to ensure your own dignity and security." The video showed Richard leaning back in his chair, looking directly into the camera with an expression of profound love and determination. "Either way, never let anyone make you feel powerless again. You are stronger than you know, and you deserve so much better than what they've been giving you." As the video ended and the screen went dark, I sat in the stunned silence of the lawyer's office, feeling like I was seeing the world clearly for the first time in 2 years. The power had been in my hands all along. I just hadn't known it existed. The silence that followed the end of Richard's video was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was the kind of silence that happens when the world shifts on its axis, when everything you thought you knew reveals itself to be an illusion. Mr. Richardson cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to explain exactly what this means in terms of your current situation. As of this moment, you have several options available to you." I nodded, though my mind was still reeling. The woman who had walked into this office an hour ago, the woman who had felt powerless and discarded, was gone. In her place sat someone I barely recognized, someone who held all the cards in a game I hadn't even realized I was playing. "First," Mr. Richardson continued, opening a thick folder, "let me show you the actual state of your finances." He spread several documents across the table: bank statements, investment portfolios, property assessments, numbers that made my eyes widen in shock. "You currently have assets worth approximately $2 million, Mrs. Patterson. The house is valued at $450,000 and is entirely yours. Your investment portfolio has grown considerably since your husband's death, thanks to his careful planning and the rising market." Lyra made a strangled sound. "That's impossible. The house has a mortgage, the accounts are joint." "Actually, Mr. Richardson said calmly, the mortgage was paid off through the trust 18 months ago. What you've been calling mortgage payments were actually maintenance funds being deposited into a separate account for property upkeep." I stared at him. "You mean when they told me I needed to contribute to the mortgage payments?" "You were paying into your own home maintenance fund," he confirmed. "Every dollar you gave them for household expenses went into accounts that you control." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They had been taking my money while making me feel like I was a financial burden. They had convinced me I couldn't afford to live in my own home while secretly depositing my contributions into accounts I owned. Darren finally spoke, his voice hollow. "Mom, we didn't know. I swear we didn't know about the trust. But you knew about the lies," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. "You knew you were making me pay for things that were already paid for. You knew Lyra was throwing away Richard's belongings and treating me like I was incompetent." He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to find words that would make any of this better. Mr. Richardson pulled out another document. "There's something else, Mrs. Patterson. Your husband included specific provisions about what should happen if the conditions of mistreatment were met." "What kind of provisions?" "Financial recovery provisions. Any money you've given to family members under false pretenses can be immediately reclaimed. This includes the $15,000 you provided for bathroom renovations, the $8,000 for the new refrigerator and appliances, and approximately $24,000 in what you believed were mortgage and utility contributions over the past 18 months. My breath caught. Nearly $50,000. Money I had scraped together from my savings, Money I had worried about spending because I thought I was living on limited means. Furthermore, Mr. Richardson continued, since they were living in your home without paying rent while simultaneously deceiving you about the financial situation, you're entitled to charge back rent for the entire period. Back rent? I whispered. At current market rates for a house of this size, approximately $2,400 per month. For 18 months, that would be $43,200, I calculated automatically, my mind sharp despite the emotional chaos. Lyra shot to her feet, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. This is insane. You can't just suddenly decide we owe you money for living in the family home. It's not the family home, Mr. Richardson said matter-of-factly. It's Mrs. Patterson's home. You've been living there as guests, albeit guests who have been systematically deceiving your hostess about her own finances. Darren, say something. Lyra turned to her husband desperately, but Darren was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shame, certainly. Regret, maybe, but also something that looked like the dawning realization of just how badly they had treated me. Mom, he said softly, I didn't mean for it to happen like this, but you let it happen, I replied, my voice growing stronger with each word. You watched your wife humiliate me in my own home. You stood by while she threw away your father's belongings. You never once stood up for me when she made me feel like I was a burden. She convinced me you were getting confused, that you needed help managing things. I was never confused, Darren. I was grieving. There's a difference. Mr. Richardson pulled out yet another document. Mrs. Patterson, there's one more thing your husband wanted you to know. He left you a personal letter, separate from the trust documents. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Richard's familiar handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it. My dearest Glenda, the letter began, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. Our son has allowed his wife to treat you with the disrespect and cruelty that no mother should ever have to endure. Tears started flowing down my cheeks as I continued reading silently. I want you to know that you are not the weak, confused old woman they've tried to make you believe you are. You are the strongest person I've ever known. You raised our son to be a good man, but somehow he lost his way. Don't let his failures diminish your worth. The letter went on for 2 pages, reminding me of my strengths, my accomplishments, the sacrifices I had made for our family. It ended with words that hit me like a lightning bolt. You have spent your whole life taking care of others. Now it's time to take care of yourself. You owe them nothing except what they earn through respect and kindness. And sweetheart, they haven't earned anything. I folded the letter carefully and looked up at the faces around the table. Tom and Margaret were studying their hands, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. Lyra was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of a person who had just realized their scheme had collapsed. And Darren was looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Mom, he whispered, what can I do to fix this? I stood up slowly, feeling every bit of my 59 years, but also feeling stronger than I had in months. I don't know if you can fix this, Darren, but I know what I'm going to do. I turned to Mr. Richardson. I want them out of my house by the end of the week. I want every penny they owe me calculated and documented, and I want to make sure this can never happen to me again. Of course, Mrs. Patterson. I'll prepare all the necessary paperwork. Lyra's crying became louder, more desperate. Glenda, please, we can work this out. We're family. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had systematically tried to destroy my self-worth and steal my security. Family doesn't lie to each other, I said quietly. Family doesn't make each other feel worthless. Family doesn't threaten to throw each other away like garbage. I gathered my purse and Richard's letter, feeling lighter with each step toward the door. I'll be in touch about the arrangements, Mr. Richardson, and thank you for keeping my husband's promise to protect me. As I walked out of that office, I could hear Lyra's voice behind me, high and panicked, demanding to know how they were going to pay me back, where they were going to live, but for the first time in 2 years, her problems weren't mine to solve. I was finally free. The house felt different when I walked through the front door that evening. It was still the same house where Richard and I had raised Darren, where we had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where we had built a life together. But now it felt like mine again, truly mine, in a way it hadn't for the past 2 years. Lyra was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with her phone pressed to her ear. I could hear fragments of her conversation as I passed by. Completely unreasonable. She can't just kick us out. There has to be something we can do legally. She hung up when she saw me and turned around, her eyes red and swollen from crying. But there was something harder in her expression now, a calculating look that I recognized all too well. "Glenda, we need to talk," she said, her voice attempting to sound reasonable and calm. "No, we don't," I replied, heading toward the stairs. "You need to pack. You have until Sunday to be out of my house." "Your house?" Lyra's facade cracked slightly. "This has been Darren's home too. He grew up here. You can't just throw your own son out on the street." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned to face her. "Darren chose to stand by while you humiliated me. He chose to participate in lying to me about my own finances. He chose to let you treat me like I was senile and incompetent. Those were his choices, Lyra. Now he gets to live with the consequences." "He's your son!" she practically shouted. "What kind of mother throws out her own child?" The question hit me like she intended it to, stirring up the guilt I had carried for so long. But Richard's letter was still in my purse, and his words echoed in my mind. You owe them nothing except what they earn through respect and kindness. The kind of mother who finally learned that being someone's parent doesn't mean letting them destroy you, I said quietly. The kind of mother who realizes that love without respect isn't love at all. Lyra's expression shifted again, and I could practically see her switching tactics. "Look, I know things got out of hand. I know I said some things that hurt your feelings. But we're family, Glenda. Families forgive each other. They work things out." "Hurt my feelings?" I repeated, incredulous. "You convinced me I was losing my mind. You made me pay for things that were already paid for. You threw away my husband's belongings without asking. You threatened to put me in a nursing home. That wasn't hurting my feelings, Lyra. That was psychological abuse." She flinched at the word abuse, but quickly rallied. "I was trying to help you. The house is so big and you seemed overwhelmed." "I was grieving," I said firmly. "There's a difference between being overwhelmed and being incompetent. But you used my grief to manipulate me, and you taught my son to do the same thing." Darren's car pulled into the driveway at that moment, and I could hear his footsteps on the front porch. He walked in looking like he had aged 10 years since the meeting at the lawyer's office. "Mom," he said as soon as he saw me, "can we please talk?" Lyra immediately moved to his side, her hand on his arm in that possessive way I had learned to recognize. "I was trying to explain to your mother that this is all just a misunderstanding." "Stop." Darren's voice was quiet but firm, and Lyra looked shocked when he gently removed her hand from his arm. "Just stop talking for a minute." He looked at me with eyes that reminded me for just a moment of the little boy he used to be. "Mom, I know I messed up. I know I let you down. But please, can you find it in your heart to give me another chance?" The part of me that had spent 37 years being his mother wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to forgive him and pretend this had all been a bad dream. But the stronger part of me, the part that Richard had tried to protect, knew better. "What kind of chance, Darren? A chance to continue letting your wife run my life? A chance to keep lying to me about my own money? A chance to keep treating me like I'm a burden you have to manage? No, we could set boundaries. We could go to counseling. We could figure out how to make this work." I studied his face, looking for sincerity, for real remorse. What I saw instead was desperation, the desperation of a man who had just realized he had lost not just his inheritance, but his free place to live. "Darren, when was the last time you stood up for me? When was the last time you told your wife that she was wrong to treat me the way she did?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. We both knew the answer was never. "When was the last time you visited me just because you wanted to see me, not because you needed something?" Again, silence. When was the last time you thanked me for the thousands of dollars I've given you over the past 2 years, instead of making me feel guilty for not giving more? His eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of genuine remorse or just tears of self-pity. I thought I was helping you, he whispered. Lyra said you were getting confused, that you needed us to manage things for you. And you believed her instead of talking to me directly. You believed her when she said I was incompetent, even though I raised you by myself for years after your father's first heart attack. You believed her when she said I couldn't handle my own finances, even though I managed to put you through college and save enough money to buy this house outright. Lyra stepped forward again, her voice taking on a wheedling tone. Glenda, maybe we all made mistakes. Maybe we can start fresh. I promise things will be different. I looked at her for a long moment, remembering every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment she had made me feel small and worthless in my own home. Your promise isn't worth anything to me, Lyra. You promised to love and honor my son, but you turned him into someone I barely recognize. You promised to be part of our family, but you've spent 2 years trying to erase me from it. I turned to Darren. And you. You promised to love and protect the people who mattered to you, but when it came time to choose between protecting me and keeping your wife happy, you chose her comfort over my dignity every single time. The silence that followed was broken by Lyra's phone ringing. She glanced at it, and then at Darren with a look of panic. That's the lawyer I called, she whispered. She says we might have grounds to contest the trust. Answer it, I said calmly. Go ahead and contest it. But you should know that while you're spending money on lawyers, I'll be charging you rent for every day you stay in my house, and interest on the money you owe me. Mr. Richardson was very clear about my legal rights. Lyra's face went white. You're bluffing. I pulled out my phone and showed her the text message Mr. Richardson had sent me an hour ago. Daily rate for continued occupancy, $125 per day. Interest rate on outstanding debt, 8% annually, compounding monthly. All legally enforceable under the terms of the trust. Darren sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Mom, where are we supposed to go? We don't have money for a deposit on an apartment, especially if we have to pay you back. For a moment, my heart almost softened. But then I remembered Lyra's voice that morning. You're going to end up with nothing, and we're sending you to a nursing home. You should have thought about that before you decided I was disposable, I said quietly. I started up the stairs, then paused halfway up. Oh, and Lyra, I want my mother's china back, and my grandmother's jewelry. All the things you convinced me to lend you because they would be safer in your room. Those were gifts, she protested. I smiled for the first time in hours. Prove it. Show me where I signed anything giving them to you. Show me the documentation, because Mr. Richardson is going to need a complete inventory of everything that needs to be returned. As I continued up the stairs, I could hear them whispering frantically below, planning, scheming, trying to find some way out of the corner they had painted themselves into. But for the first time in 2 years, their panic wasn't my problem to solve. I went into my bedroom, the bedroom that Richard and I had shared for 35 years, and looked around. Tomorrow, I would start reclaiming my space, my life, my dignity. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of healing from what they had done to me. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully in my own bed, in my own house, knowing that no one could take it away from me ever again. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee and actually smiled at the morning sunshine streaming through the windows. The house was quiet, genuinely peaceful quiet, not the tense walking on eggshells quiet it had been when Darren and Lyra lived here. They had moved out that Sunday, just as I'd demanded. It hadn't been graceful. There had been more tears from Lyra, more pleading from Darren, and a few not-so-subtle threats about how I would regret treating family this way. But Mr. Richardson had been thorough in his documentation, and they quickly realized that fighting me legally would cost them far more than they could ever hope to gain. The final accounting had been sobering, including back rent, fraudulent expenses, and the value of my belongings they had borrowed. They owed me $127,000. They had managed to pay back $23,000 by selling Lyra's car and some jewelry. The rest was being paid in monthly installments that would take them 5 years to complete. I had been tempted to forgive the debt. The old me would have done exactly that. But Richard's letter had been clear. You owe them nothing except what they earn through respect and kindness. They hadn't earned forgiveness. They had earned consequences. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Hello, Mom. Darren's voice was hesitant, uncertain. We hadn't spoken since the day they moved out, though he had been sending monthly checks with brief notes attached. Hello, Darren. I kept my voice neutral. I was wondering if we could talk. Maybe meet somewhere for coffee? I considered this. What about? I've been going to counseling. Individual counseling, not couples counseling. I wanted to understand how things went so wrong between us. This surprised me. The Darren I knew would have blamed everyone else for his problems. And what have you learned? There was a long pause. That I stopped being your son somewhere along the way. That I became someone I don't even recognize. Someone Dad would have been ashamed of. The mention of Richard hit me unexpectedly hard. Your father loved you, Darren, even when he was disappointed in you. I know. That's part of what makes this so hard. His voice cracked slightly. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you. What I let Lyra do to you. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden Richard and I had planted together. It was thriving now that I had time to tend it properly. Where is Lyra? I asked. Another pause. We separated 3 months ago. She couldn't handle the financial pressure. Or the fact that I finally started standing up to her when she badmouthed you. I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that he had finally found his backbone. Sadness that it had taken losing everything for him to find it. She's living with her sister in Phoenix, he continued. She wanted me to declare bankruptcy, to find some way to get out of paying you back. When I refused, she said I was choosing you over her. And were you? I was choosing to do the right thing. Finally, he was quiet for a moment. Mom, I know this doesn't make up for anything, but I need you to know that I'm proud of you for standing up to us. I'm proud of you for not letting us destroy you completely. Tears started in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of something I had thought was lost forever. Hope. Would you like to come to dinner on Sunday? I heard myself ask. I'll make pot roast, the way you used to like it. Are you sure? His voice was full of cautious hope. I'm sure. But Darren, we're starting from scratch. You don't get to be my son just because you were born to me. You have to earn it back. I understand. And Mom, I want to earn it back. I want to be the man Dad raised me to be. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. 6 months ago, I had been a broken woman who felt powerless and discarded. Today, I was someone who had reclaimed not just her assets, but her sense of self-worth. The house around me told the story of that transformation. Richard's photographs were back on the mantel. His favorite coffee mug sat in its place in the cabinet. The rooms were decorated the way I wanted them, not the way someone else thought they should be. I had reconnected with old friends who had been gradually pushed out of my life. My bridge club was meeting here again next Tuesday. I had even started dating. Nothing serious. Just coffee with a nice widower from church who made me laugh and treated me with respect. The woman who had been threatened with a nursing home was now volunteering at the local senior center, helping other elderly people understand their financial rights. I had seen too many situations like my own. Adult children taking advantage of grieving parents, using confusion and isolation as weapons. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that love without respect isn't love at all. It's manipulation, and I was worth more than that. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, I found a delivery man holding a small package. "Glenda Patterson?" he asked. I signed for the package and looked at the return address. It was from a jewelry store in Phoenix, Lyra's new city. Inside was my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one Lyra had claimed was lost during their move. There was a note with it. "Mrs. Patterson, I found this among my daughter's belongings. She told me it belonged to her, but the inscription inside says, 'To my darling Glenda, with love, Grandma Rose.' I thought you should have it back. I'm sorry for any trouble my daughter caused you. Patricia Morrison." I held the pearls in my hands, remembering my grandmother fastening them around my neck on my wedding day. They had been in Lyra's jewelry box all along, probably the first thing she had hidden when they moved in. But instead of anger, I felt something like pity for Lyra. She had traded a family for some stolen jewelry and a life built on lies. In the end, she had lost everything that mattered and kept only the things that didn't. That evening, I called my neighbor Helen, who had become a good friend again after being frozen out during the Lyra years. Helen, I wanted to ask you something. Do you remember what I was like before? Before Richard died? Before everything that happened with Darren and his wife? Helen was quiet for a moment. You were strong, Glenda. You were kind, but you didn't let people walk all over you. You spoke your mind. You took care of people, but you took care of yourself too. I feel like I'm finding that person again, I said. Good, Helen replied firmly. I missed her. As I got ready for bed that night, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was 59 years old, with gray hair and wrinkles and age spots. But she was also strong, dignified, unbroken. Richard had been right in his letter. I wasn't the weak, confused old woman they had tried to make me believe I was. I was the woman who had survived being widowed at 24 and raised a son alone. I was the woman who had worked 2 jobs and put herself through night school. I was the woman who had loved deeply and lost greatly and kept going anyway. I was enough. I had always been enough. And tomorrow, I would wake up in my own house, in my own bed, living my own life on my own terms. Tomorrow, and every day after that, I would be free. Darren might earn his way back into my life, or he might not. Either way, I would be fine. Because I had learned the most important lesson of all. The only person responsible for my happiness was me. And for the first time in years, I was truly, deeply happy. As I turned off the light and settled into bed, I whispered a quiet thank you to Richard for protecting me even from beyond the grave, and to myself for finally finding the courage to accept that protection. Some endings are really beginnings. This was mine. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.